Okay, we are live. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Wild and Precious Optimal Living Show. I am your host, Dr. Sam, with my wonderful co-host,
Dr. Lynn.
And we are so excited for you to join us on our wonderful wellness journey today. We've got a great guest that Dr. Lynn will be introducing here. And as always, our show is sponsored by Neurosolutions Cold Laser Therapy. Dr. Lynn, what are we talking about today, and who are we talking to?
Yes, we're very fortunate to be able to have Ms. Ruth Trode on the show. She is the craniosacral therapist, and with just a slew of other great tools under her belt as well too. She's been in the health industry for quite a long time, and the first time I came across Ruth is when she first talked about one of her other practices, which is homeopathy, and she and during her presentation just created and presented a very different aspect to approach to health, a much more honoring aspect of it as well too. And Ruth continues, she's a scholar. She continues to study, she continues to work with her clients, and in a very loving and just gentle approach too, I have to say. And we often think that when we're addressing our health, it has to be very invasive, or we have to look at just one aspect of the body, but Ruth presents it from a more holistic approach too, and I think that's why we very much complement each other in both our practice and what Truth practices too, and how Truth practices Ruth practices. And so today we are going to be speaking more specifically on, you might have heard about this, the vagal system, the vagal nerve, right? And there's probably a lot of different words that's being tossed around about the vagal system. So let's dive into what that really is, and what are some approaches to stimulate and activate that, and why that's important. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So with that said, Dr. Sam, tell us a little bit more about our sponsor, though, Neurosolutions. What do they do?
Yeah, absolutely. Neurosolutions Cold Laser Therapy. So like any tool out there, it's only as good as the knowledge behind it, right? So Neurosolutions has one of the most cutting edge and most cost-effective cold lasers on the market that combines both red and infrared light therapy, as well as targeted specific frequencies for not only organ systems but the vagal nerve as well as also specific parts of the brain. So if you're looking to up your healthcare game, then look no further than Neurosolutions.
Yes, and as we're geeking out today, obviously we're going to talk a little bit more about how we utilize cold laser, but then at the same time Ruth brings in the craniosacral and may not necessarily have to have all the tools too. It's going to be great to be able to learn from her. So Ruth, thank you so much for joining us today, and so grateful that you are going to be sharing it with us today. So please tell our audience a little bit more about, what you do and how has craniosacral therapy come into your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Well, basically, I've been a craniosacral therapist for 15 years. And the short story is that I got trained when I was pregnant with my last child. And I had a pretty difficult hyperemesis in the first trimester. And I had just fresh coming out of the hospital after getting an IV. I visited my midwife, and she's like, "So, Ruth, this is your fourth kid. What do you want from me? How can I help you?" And I just blurted out from nowhere, "I think I need craniosacral therapy and homeopathy." and that was kind of my first step into really getting serious about my health, my children's health, and using alternative medicine. So my midwife pulled out a brochure and said, "Dr. Carol Phillips is in town," and Dr. Carol Phillips is a chiropractor that teaches pediatrics, and she trains craniosacral therapists, and she says that she needs pregnant models for her students to work on, and I'm like, "I'm there, take me." So I showed up on a Saturday morning and sat through the lectures, and then was worked on in the afternoon by the students. The information is so fascinating to me. So my background before craniosacral therapy was a childbirth educator, a birth doula. I have a paralegal degree, so I can basically run my business. I I knew the basic information about how birth works. I have 4 children myself that I extended breastfed, so I have that knowledge. But incorporating this information of how imbalances lead to longer labors, lead to breastfeeding issues, leading to possible trauma in the birth, it really made sense to me to put those puzzle pieces together. And after I sat in on that Saturday and got worked on, I asked Dr. Carol Phillips, is this something that I can do? I'm not a body worker. I'm not a massage therapist. I'm not a chiropractor. Is this something I can do? And she actually was excited that I was interested in learning it and practicing it because she said not a lot of people work on babies. And we need people who aren't afraid to work on babies. So I kind of, I took my last module with my newborn because I started training while I was pregnant. And I actually, it was January, and I had slipped on ice on my way to the workshop. And I did several 360s in my car on the ice, and it was an hour late, and everybody was worried about me. But then I was able to release that twist and tightness from being spun in a car accident immediately. And there I was, 8 or 9 months pregnant, rolling, undoing, and unwinding that tightness that occurred in my fascial system. So that was just, a little taste there of my introduction to it. And basically, since my midwife started sending me babies and pregnant women and postpartum women to work on right away, so that was kind of my niche, was working on babies and postpartum women and helping with breastfeeding and such. And that's what I've been doing. I would say that at one point, 80% of my practice was babies and children, but now I would say it's probably more 50-50 adults. So I work on all ages and seeing all sorts of things. It's been an interesting journey. But during COVID, I had to rethink my practice, and I had always thought that I wanted to teach parents how to do this, because I can't be on every playground when a kid falls on their sacrum or might hit their head on the concrete and need that craniosacral release or myofascial release that would benefit them right away. But who can be? The parents, So I always envisioned teaching parents craniosacral therapy, and during COVID, I had the time and the opportunity to write out my outline and put together a syllabus and create a workshop for parents to learn craniosacral therapy. So that's been my kind of passion. But of course, I like to put lots of things on my plate. So during COVID, I also got a bachelor's degree in homeopathy. So, never a dull moment in my life. And I like to keep going and going and going because I'm a lifelong learner. So that has been something. So I've dived into research and also craniosacral research and homeopathy research, and it's really been I love research, and it actually brings me back to my paralegal degree because I love the legal research part. That was my favorite class. So I like learning what's going on. So diving into that also, I looked up information on the vagal nerve. So I started to see research come forward with COVID affecting the vagus nerve and polyvagal theory and how that is affected by the pandemic. And I wrote down some things here from a paper out of Science Direct that says that COVID-19 pandemic has led to a notable increase in mental health problems. Both viral and psychosocial stressors can trigger changes in biological processes that affect immunity and inflammation. Vagus nerve function is one pathway that is central to health-relevant mind-body interactions, and that lifestyle changes and non-invasive vagal nerve stimulation are 2 strategies for improving vagus nerve function, and improved vagus nerve function may in turn help promote biopsychosocial resilience. So I have that reference for you to possibly share with your audience later in my bibliography. But I started pulling research from PubMed and other resources on, what's going on here. We kind of see something happening with the loss of taste and smell with COVID. It's affecting our olfactory nerve. It's affecting, something is going on, whether physically or psychologically, that is happening to people who suffer from COVID. But also, they don't need to have COVID. You still have the effects of the pandemic itself that affects the vagus nerve, which literally touches all of the organs, the digestive, the heart, the lungs, and such. So, and we can go further into that as well. But other studies show that CST is helpful for patients with complex trauma, including post-traumatic stress disorder. And this particular study I have in my bibliography is patients seem to benefit from holistic treatment philosophy, including craniosacral therapy. But with that said, I do want to make the point that if there are serious psychological health issues, that of course you need to see a professional. However, with everyday stress that your child, a partner, or yourself have experienced throughout the last 2 years, it may benefit and may be mitigated from learning these techniques that I teach, so and that I do myself. It's very interesting. I have 3 kids at home. My kids are older. My oldest is out. But they all ask me to work on them because I think they're craving the touch, for one, because there's all sorts of benefits from touching. I think of the classic book of Touching, The Human Significance of the Skin by Ashley Montague. And it's so fascinating to think that, we've been deprived very much, not only looking at people's faces and their smiles and having communication and contact with people, but how it can, we see with children, they've moved out the developmental stages, 6 months, because the infants and children are not developing on schedule like they were because I think of the lack of touch and facial recognition and such with wearing masks and such. So coming back into touch and learning these gentle techniques, I feel is so important to get back out of that stress response that we have been in as a culture, as a globe, for a while now.
Yeah, hugely important. And that 2 things that you're talking about make me think of. One of them was a mentor of mine who shared a research just on touch, and they used laboratory mice. I think, the cruelty of research, I believe they gave the mice cancer, and in the control group was they didn't touch the mice, and in the variable group all they did was pick them up and pet them for like 2 minutes a day. That was it. And the mice that were just handled and touched, majority of them, the cancer retreated and resolved. And the ones they didn't, obviously the cancer took over. Just the importance of just touch in general, and even just, hey, we pick up, as an American culture, even prior to COVID compared to other cultures, European cultures and Latin American cultures, we're pretty touch and averse. We're a pretty socially distant country in general. So yeah, I think we've only gotten worse with that. And then beginning points on the vagal tone, I think it's coming out this month actually out of Spain. There should be really interesting research coming out about the vagus nerve and long COVID symptoms. So that'd be really interesting to see. It's kind of for most of us in the know, it's kind of a big, no crap, Sherlock. We know this is important, but for the medical community at large, it'll be like this really novel, oh my gosh, this is so important. We're all like, yeah, duh.
Well, for our audience, just explain a little bit more detail of what you're referring to in terms of this study here.
Sure, yeah. So in Spain right now, I believe preliminary results came out in January, just stating that long COVID symptoms have a correlation with vagal nerve dysfunction. And as I'm sure we'll get into, vagus nerve is the primary nerve for relaxation and for healing. And for many of those out there, they're struggling with long COVID symptoms. They're showing vagus nerve dysfunction. And likely the results are going to show that, hey, if we can rehabilitate this nerve, we can help get it to function better, we're going to see better results with long COVID symptoms. And I'm sure, like I said, as Ruth has probably seen daily, we start to get that system working well. Oh my gosh, you get better. It's amazing. It's like magic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one CDC, I mean, this is an older one, but it's not specifically to the vagal nerve, but in terms of just relating to how our body is a lot more vulnerable to stressors because of fear, because of poor health aspects and lifestyle conditions, which is really due to chronic stressors too. Mm-hmm. And CDC even released last June, where it was a study that studied people who entered the hospital system with COVID and trying to understand what were some of the factorial conditions that accompanied these patients that worsened their symptoms, just looking at that. So looking at COVID symptoms, more likelihood to die, right? More likelihood for more serious symptoms. And what accompanied that was metabolic disease, which is type 2 diabetes. There's also, along that top of the list, was anxiety, sleep issues, depression. And, Ruth, you talked about mental health being skyrocketing now since COVID, and it's very true in a sense where is it COVID itself, or is it the lifestyle that's created, their environment that's been created from all of this, and how, unfortunately, there's a lot of polarization behind it. There's a lot of censorship too. We had briefly talked about last night in terms of available resources that people can truly have to help to shift their health, turn their health around. And when there's a lot of these censorship, when there's a lot of polarization, it doesn't necessarily lead to any greater health support. It continues to create more division, creates a weaker health, creates fear, creates anxiety. It adds on. Not to mention, now there's economic struggles, right? The increased inflation of everything that we're seeing, that added stressor to everyday, as parents, as everyday trying to live through, how do we allow ourselves to stay resilient during these times? And I think when we come back to addressing the vagal system, vagal nerve, and the magic behind this, and not just magic, but really the science behind all this, really, there's, I think that's so great that, Ruth, you're providing education for parents to empower, because right now kiddos, the question is, how are they socializing, even as masks are starting to remove, mask mandates are starting to remove, there's this disconnect there, I do believe, right? And I think promoting touch between parents and their babies, starting to create that, is so much needed, and I think that's a very powerful tool that you're offering.
Well, thank you. I want to explain that craniosacral therapy is done fully clothed, hands-on, gentle, subtle techniques, very non-invasive, and it's basically my line is hold, wait, and follow. So basically, the person that is being worked on is the lead dancer, and you as the therapist are the follower, and you just follow where the body wants to go. Yes, there's a protocol. Yes, there's specific techniques. But in the end, the body's going to tell you what it wants to release and where to go and where to hold. So, it's some people might think that, oh, it's like massage therapy. It's like, no, it is a gentle, subtle technique, very, very light touch. But what I have noticed, talking again to the vagus nerve, and the research is showing that auricular stimulation with electrodes, which is ear stimulation to the side of the ear, is helping to stimulate the vagus nerve and calm the vagus nerve. In my workshops, I teach ear releases. So when I was reading through this research, I'm like, oh, I can do that. I can do that with electrodes. And one thing that is so fascinating, which we can kind of dive into as well, is I've noticed the majority of my patients that I work on and do ear releases on. And at first I thought it was just mask wearing that was, causing this tightness in the temporalis bone. But I noticed that it was mostly right-sided. And so, the right side of the brain is supposed to control creativity, imagination, and we've had very little of that, I would say, also in the last 2 years. Very regimented types of things. We have to be, we have to think harder. We have to, even, with the hypoxia and lack of oxygen with mask wearing, we have to literally think harder because, we're getting less oxygen to the brain. So that's something. I don't know if Sam has a comment on that information.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of called that shot early on because we know a lot of like right brain issues will also lead to socialization problems. So I mean, autism being the farthest out there manifestation of this, but a lot of like textbook autism cases that we see are going to have what we in our office call like a right brain deficit, meaning most of the right brain is not functioning as well as the left. The example I always give is like think the left brain is running at like 5G, think the right brain is running at like dial-up, right? So yeah, that's really interesting though that you find locks in the temporalis bone and what's going on there, because you're likely having an issue with decrease in right brain function. Yeah, because we're not socializing either, right? We're locked indoors, we're not seeing each other, you're not seeing the facial expressions of people. So really interesting that you'd find that.
So specifically for the locks in the temporalis region, what is it that is associated with that region?
Actually, Sam might have more information with that.
I think it was like smell, like this, because when we think about smell and memory, perhaps even with the neural pathways for smell, and do you think that could be? I'm just curious.
I'm not following your question. I'm sorry.
I guess with the lock in the temporalis region, right? What are some of the specific maybe associated things that are in that involved in that?
Are you talking about the temporalis bone or the temporal lobe?
The temporal, is that the temporal bone that you're talking about with the lock is specifically, or is it?
Yes, around the ear.
Yeah, so yeah, specifically around there, is there any specific things that are associated with that, with the temporal bone?
And people have told me that if they get tinnitus, that it's more right-sided as well.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's something is being affected.
Yeah.
Of course, the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. So you might have physical responses on the left side of the body in response to that restriction that's going on the right side of the head. Whatever that is, whether it's tightness in the knee or the hip, or even the spleen on the left side, which helps with making T cells and B cells to in the immune system and the heart. Yeah.
Here's a weird question for you, Ruth, because this is it's so funny. The tinnitus keeps coming up a lot, and more than I've ever thought I'd hear it. Have you seen an increase in people complaining of tinnitus? And that's interesting you mentioned right side, because I struggle with that right now. That's come out of nowhere. And I don't know what's going on, but I'm seeing a lot more too.
Yes, I don't have an answer for it either, other than, affecting the right side of the brain. And yes, to me, it's also, I'm noticing it on the right side. And it's, it could be related to blood flow and lower oxygen in the blood flow from the COVID as it affects the iron in the system. Is it something else? Is it a complication of something else? Is it 5G? Is it, something that's going on in our environment? I think we have a big mystery here, and all we can do is try to put puzzle pieces together as we move forward and try to figure out what's going on. But yes, I have seen lots of tinnitus, especially after COVID.
Yeah. Very interesting.
So Ruth, I'm curious, how do you stimulate? You mentioned earlier, because that's something that we do in our office. Sam works with the vagal nerve by stimulating through the auricular region as well too. and we have a particular pen, the electrode, for that. And for you, I think you approach it differently, and so I'm curious how you do it through hands.
Yeah, I just use my own two hands.
Yeah.
So because craniosacral is a light touch therapy, I'm able to, after 15 years, you can feel the subtleties of the energy flow in your hands. So, and the proprioceptors of the hands can pick up, especially, if trained and experienced, can pick up these electric impulses. I have Release that I've been trained in and that I teach my workshop trainees, where we work with the temporalis bone, and then we work with the inner ear, and basically, again, just gently pull on it, and we, again, use that term of hold, wait, and follow. And oftentimes what will occur is I will start to feel either a buzzing or a throbbing or some sort of electrical impulse that is happening. If there's a throb going on, that usually speaks to me that there's restriction, there's lack of blood flow, nerve flow, fluid flow in the area, and the body is trying to pump that into the area to keep it functioning. So that it's, it might be called stagnant chi, where it's just stuck. I call it congested, restricted, all of these terms. I might even call it dehydrated, because it just feels like there's less fluid in the tissues to have tone. So I will gently pull in various directions, and then what occurs with that gentle pull, it's the piezoelectric on the muscles. So if you just, an electrical current starts to occur from my hand to the client, and this stimulates the area, and then what I feel is a buildup of energy. It kind of feels heavier. I liken it to that water bucket at the rec center that fills up with water, and then once it's full, it dumps, and you get drenched with fluid. So when that energy builds up and then dumps, what happens is what's called a myofascial winding. And it's very small and, again, subtle. When we're working with something as small as an ear or a temporalis bone, and you just, it kind of, the ear kind of vibrates under your hand as you follow it, and then it lets go, and your hand falls right off because there's no restriction to hold you onto it. And then I do mid-ear, where you might stimulate with the electrical pen. I do mid-ear, and when you look at the anatomy of the skull, the membrane that surrounds the brain connects into the temporalis and also into the sphenoid bone, where the nerves come out of, the cranial nerves come through. And the membrane that surrounds the brain, I can feel actually it relax and expand and become hydrated and open up. And then we see potentially the symptoms of that right-sided issues start to relax and balance between the left and the right. And again, it just kind of disappear because of those releases.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm curious then, this is something that Sam and I have always been trying to figure out, because as we're trying to communicate with our clients and we're talking about how the work of being able to increase and stimulate the vagal nerve, the vagus nerve, and the associated cranial nerves that accompany it as well too, how that can support mental health, like anxiety or depression. How are you communicating that with your clients, and how does the change, physical change, is the foundation too to supporting their mental health? And how are you measuring that in your office?
So when the vagus nerve is relaxed, which Sam talked about earlier, it's not a fact, in the studies that I have read, again, on breastfeeding, it's not the fact that the child is getting in more nutrition when the vagus nerve is relaxed. It's that they're absorbing more of the nutrients from the food that they are receiving. So when the vagus nerve is relaxed, you can take in more. You can, your growth happens. So, Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about you can either be in protection, in fear, or you can be in growth, but you can't be in both at the same time. So when that vagus nerve is calm, when it's relaxed, it's not that we're taking in more nutrition, it is that we're absorbing more of that nutrition. And of course, that's optimal, right? we want to be able to absorb our nutrition and not have to overeat to get that level of nutrition. When I see that the vagus nerve is hyperstimulated, is what I call it, there's typically tension and stress in the neck. There might even be occipital headaches, which is the back of the head. And the occipital itself is pressed into the tissues of the spine, okay? Now, the vagus nerve does go down the front of the spine, so having the occipital press into and be all tight into the spinal area. It's not so much that it's pressing on the vagus nerve, it's that the tissues surrounding it are so tight that they're restricting the flow to the vagus nerve. Okay, and when I can do an occipital release, which I also teach, it's an important piece. I can walk across my kids' school campus and I can point out the children who need an occipital release. Not only physically seeing it with my eyes, but how they're acting, with hyperactivity and such like that. And also, you want to have it balanced. There is so much imbalance in the occipital area from birth, from growth. It can happen at any time. It can happen with an accident, a fall, or a blow, or even being in a car accident and such. But it can definitely be from birth as well, or in utero. And if again, I use the analogy that I have to, I laugh at the young people, but I say, in the olden days, when we had corded telephones, and in the kitchen phone that had the long cord that you could, talk on the phone while washing dishes, or hand it to your sister at the table, and, she would then talk to auntie or what have you. And you'd hang up the phone, and the cord would bind up, right? And, get really tight. So what happens in an accident or birth trauma or other types of even emotional trauma, what happens is the fascia, the connective system that glues the body together, it gets bound up and tight. And it can function, but just like that corded phone in the kitchen, over time it gets worse and worse and worse and tighter and tighter and tighter, right? And so what we do to release that tension is we take the phone off the wall and we dangle it. And it goes left, right, up, down, figure eights, wherever it needs to go to unwind itself. And that's what craniosacral is doing with the myofascial system, when you just hold, wait for that energy to build up, and allow that myofascial release and follow where it wants to go. That's basically, and I think you had another question that I didn't answer.
Oh, no, that was beautiful. Another question that I had is, how are you measuring that for someone who may not necessarily have symptoms outside of just, I feel restless, I feel like there's something that keeps me on edge. And outside of communicating, yes, there's wonderful, great meditation and mindfulness and therapy, talk-based therapies or behavioral-based therapies. All those are wonderful and necessary. But the physical component and associating that with the necessity to addressing anxiety or mental health, how are you measuring that outside too, to let someone know that this is all related to the body?
Well, the short answer is I'm booked out a month and a half.
Yes.
So the success is, you know, in that people are filling up my schedule and coming and getting this work done and coming back and, you know, seeing the benefits. How I think the client is measuring it because they feel the difference. Mm-hmm. They feel that calmness after being worked on and having their session. In particular, there is fascia inside the body that is in the torso. And I've been lately doing under the arms and pulling under the arms and stretching that fascia to release. And I know it's completed, not only when the person relaxes, but you hear this deep sigh. And all the tension goes out of their body, and they no longer have to be on hyper alert, and they don't feel that fight or flight sensation anymore, and they're completely relaxed, and then they can think clearer. So yes, I have, you know, ADHD children in my practice that, you know, the parents are like, you know, the kids fight over who's going to get work done because I see families. So, you know, I can see a family of 2, 4, 6 in a 90-minute session, and you know, that one person, you know, the 3-year-old might get 10 minutes, but you know, the mom might get 40, and you know, the kids literally fight to go first. Now, of course, you know, it's calm in my office, so, you know, the fighting is like, I got there first. But yes, there's usually a conversation beforehand of who's going to go first in my practice. So anyway, my measurement, I would say, is, you know, people coming back, telling me that, you know, they're more calm, they can handle things better, life is easier.
I think that, I'm just curious then, what is the most optimal time for receiving craniosacral? So you mentioned like a kiddo receives only 10 minutes, mom receives 40 minutes. Like, what's an optimal time to expect for craniosacral?
Well, children, especially children under the age of, say, 8. So they don't have a very long attention span. I start out with initial appointments being longer because there's usually paperwork and talk and explanation and answering questions. So I start everyone off with a longer initial appointment, and children are 45 minutes initially, and again, 15 minutes of that is probably answering questions and filling out paperwork. And then they typically get about a 25 to 30 minute session, because that's about how long a child attention span can last. But also, with that said, when a child has had craniosacral therapy and they come in for another session, a wellness session, they know this. They're like, oh, I got this. You know, so they respond much quicker, and they release much faster, as opposed to perhaps an adult that has had a lifetime of injuries, maybe many car accidents, and there's some hold, and there's you know, you kind of have to create a safe environment for them to feel safe to release the tension. And it takes time, just like, you know, that tightness that occurs in the old-fashioned wired foam. Over time, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter, so it might take a little bit longer in the adult to release. But everybody's different. You can't assume. Every time I think something is, you know, like somebody's going to move a certain way, and I prepare myself ergonomically to respond to that, it always goes something different.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you really have to be open to, you know, just going with the flow and following where they want to go.
So how often is a person initially starting to see you first? Is there a frequency? Obviously, I'm curious because from chiropractic perspective, it's like rewiring the neurology and consistency.
Yes, and let me quickly answer that. An adult will probably, I schedule them an hour and 15 minutes initial appointment, and then a follow-up is about 50 minutes, okay? And then the families, you know, that after they've been seen initially, then they've been scheduled for 90 minutes, and as many, I have people who schedule 90 minutes for just one person. So, or they might schedule 2 children and 1 adult, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But again, the 3-year-old's not going to last as long on the table as long as the 10-year-old or the teenager. But in answer to your question of how long, again, going back to everybody is different. I don't typically like to tell people that they have to come in a certain amount of times. Have I seen benefits of, say, coming once a week or once every other week for 4 sessions and then reevaluating? Yes, I have seen that benefit. But again, everybody's financial system is different. Everybody's time schedule is different. Everybody's availability of what they need is different. So I don't like to set a certain package, for each person. I have people that see me weekly. I have people that see me bi-weekly. I have people that see me once a month. I have families that see me 3 times a year. I have other people that come 1 time a year. And typically how it works in my practice is that my name is passed around to a family that has had a baby, and they might be having breastfeeding issues, and they come in and they bring the baby, and then they're like, oh, would this work for my toddler or older child? Yes, and then they bring in the older child. And then maybe 9 to 12 months later, the mom finally gets work done because she's gotten her children taken care of, and moms always put their children first. And then maybe 2 years later, the dad might come in because it's taken 2 years for the mom to convince them that they need craniosacral therapy. And then grandma visits from out of town, and mom schedules an appointment for grandma. So this is how my practice is filled up with families. It's really the full family, the extended family that I get to see.
It's such a great realization and reminder. Just everybody can benefit from activating the vagal nerve. I've been receiving craniosacral therapy because we all have a spine. We all have a nervous system. We all go through stressors and trauma and everything else. And it's just interesting that as we get older, it takes longer for us to realize, oh, I deserve that care too. So, and how we handle our everyday stressors and as our nervous system's being rewired, that can very much change the behavior, our actions, how we respond and relate. So it's all interrelated. So
I'm curious on here too. You mentioned like movements and the unwinding. So I mean, are people really dynamically moving on the table, or is it more subtle, or both?
So yes, it's both. I think especially people who haven't seen a fascial unwinding. They might be like, what's going on here? I don't want to be weird, on the table here in your office. Yeah. But they might have this sensation of, I feel like I need to get up and spin. Whatever it is. I kind of see my job as making a safe environment and administering my protocols and, putting my hands on and stimulating that electrical stimulation from my hands to the client, and what happens. And I have seen some amazing things, and it's almost to the point where I've seen such miracles that I'm a bit jaded. So people come back and like, this stopped or this happened, and I'm like, it's expected. Yeah. But I would say in the office, probably people are more inhibited in doing an unwinding. However, in a workshop, you might see some strange things happening, whether, like I was at 9 months pregnant, flipping over my 9-month belly, unwinding myself.
That's really cool. So tell us a little bit more of, do you have an upcoming workshop that is scheduled that you could share more about? How can our listeners find you?
Yes, so my website has the information, and it's truthshepard.com, and it's spelled a little bit differently. It's my middle name, so it's TRUTHSHEPARD.com. ruthtrode.com. And I do have a workshop coming up on April 8th through 10th. That's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's 9 to 5. I have another one May 20th through 22nd, and those are here in Colorado, in Lakewood. And I have a code for your listeners. If they put in last chance, all one word, all caps, last chance, they can get 50% off. So I'm offering this for a limited time, and you can also contact me via email. And if people have further questions, I can respond to those individually. But it's been interesting. So I started teaching in December, I think, of 2020, after I put all the information together, and it's been amazing. It's been utterly amazing. And my students tell me miracle stories, absolute miracle stories. And there's some testimonials on my website, but there's even more that I don't have time to put on.
Oh, that's wonderful. And are these specifically just for parents, for kids at a specific age, or who is this open to?
That's a good question. So I do find that, children are more and more interested in this. I'm open to teaching those who are interested. I'm not giving it to high schoolers, right now, until I figure out, how to meet the younger ages. But yes, I am open to teaching high schoolers, and one of my big things in teaching my information is teaching consent. We're always checking in with the people we're working on, and of course you're going to come out if you're working on your children and your partners, and maybe your aunt if they let you, if you get consent. But I have things that I call party tricks, where you can do some of these releases with people sitting in a chair. So I've adapted. You don't just have to have a treatment table to work on an individual. And really, you can do these releases sitting on a sofa, bed, chair. You don't need to be the professional. And that's what I love about it, is that you can get to those who need it right away and are suffering. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wow, this has been amazing. Thank you so much, Ruth, for joining us for the show, and really just a reminder too that you don't need a whole lot of force. Even just the subtleties of craniosacral is so supportive for the human body. So thank you so much. And Dr. Sam, tell us, what is the one question we always like to end our session?
Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll see you around. Take care, everybody. And thank you again, Ruth.
Thank you.
Thank you.